Welcome, everybody, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today, we have a community episode focused on learning and upskilling yourself in the game industry. I hope you're ready.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
I think I'm going to make it a requirement so that if anybody comes in to listen to these episodes live, they have to dance to that intro jingle. That is now a requirement. All right, welcome everybody to our live magical podcast. This is the Indie Game Lunch Hour, where we focus on those who have already broken into the game industry to hear their origin stories for how they got started, as well as directly asking them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. I am your host, as always, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy and the Wizard of Joy. And joining me today is a couple of different people, actually. This is, as I said, a community episode, which we like to do every 2 months or so. That means we don't have a scheduled specific guest, and instead we're talking with the community at large. So we're going to have a couple of mini interviews today with different community members, and during the Q&A session, instead of asking just one person that question, it will be a posed question to all, so anybody can potentially answer it. Today we're talking about upskilling and learning, the art of learning. This was actually given to us by community member Kirk. Kirk, thank you for asking us this question. Because this is something that we all care about dearly, of course, here at the Indie Game Academy, and also something we all care about as we try to move our way through the game industry. Those who are just getting started, of course, are trying to figure out how to upskill themselves to the point where they can get that first job or start their first company. And for those who are more experienced, it is a never-ending journey. I have recently incorporated ChatGPT and a couple of different AI tools into my own process, and I had to learn how to make that work and what was actually valuable there and what wasn't. And there's all kinds of new tools that get dropped all the time. Visual scripting is like huge now. That's a part of my daily workflow that didn't exist when I first got started in games. So learning is something that we all do, always, forever. I hope you're ready. So we're going to talk about that all together. Now, my first guest for the first couple of minutes here is Mike Gallegos. Now, Mike is a freelance marketer and scam artist. Excuse me. Just a great
I'll
dude.
do that in confidence.
I'm sorry. And is the one who actually recorded our intro to marketing video for the sort of vertical introductions, the fireside chat videos that we have. Great dude, comes to a lot of our podcast episodes. Just very sweet. Look him up on the Discord. Mike, I would love to hear, first of all, I guess, why don't you give us like the 60-second version of your origin story? Tell us about Mike.
Ooh, well, my mother and father met, and then we'll fast forward that part. And then, so basically, once I graduated high school, I went to university at West Point, and then I served a career in the military for 5.5 years. I had a bachelor's in engineering psychology, which is more along the lines of human factors engineering and like user experience and usability and ergonomics and such. After the military, I went overseas to Scotland. That was fun. Still here in Scotland, actually. I came here for my postgraduate degree in product design. During my time in university, the pandemics were starting to happen, so I managed to be stuck here, but I found work in influencer marketing. I worked for an agency for about a year, and then I worked remotely for a company in Los Angeles, a startup company, all within the realm of influencer marketing and gaming. So that brings my background into in marketing, specifically for games, from the agency influencer side to more of like the client side business partnerships. So a lot of my experience has to do with either marketing strategy or with business development and fostering those client partnerships. And since then, I've been pretty active in the local community here in Glasgow. I'm originally from New York, so I kind of have like a weird New York Glaswegian accent, but I'll figure it out one day. Happy to be here, Glasgow.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Dude, happy to have you here. Definitely interesting. I think before we even go anywhere, I think your story is a good one for people to hear. One, because I think marketing is a subject that honestly we don't talk about that much. We'll interview tons of programmers and technical artists and stuff like that, but marketing is not a field I think is thought of as glamorously as many of the others. But it is absolutely essential. And one of our first professors, Jordan Schutz, who runs the San Francisco game development community, look him up, very smart guy. He came in and taught us about marketing. And one of the quotes that he gave us that I still talk about to this day is that once you finish your game, you're only about 50% done. Because ultimately, your game doesn't matter if nobody plays it. I mean, that's a bit harsh, but essentially, depending on what your objective is, if nobody's playing your game's not going to go anywhere. So, Mike, I think it's wonderful that we're getting some marketing perspective, and then also I think it's wonderful to get the freelance perspective because you have found your way into the industry, but not in the same way that most people think about finding their way into the industry, which is working for like an actual studio, one specific studio. Um, so tell me this to like streamline the next couple of questions for me. What is
Hmm.
your objective here? Are you actually at a comfortable space now? Is there something else you're trying to do in your career with games? Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the moment I'm in a pretty unique position, given that I'm living in another country and I'm able to network differently. So one of the challenges with marketing, as an American here, is that a lot of times the question of is like, well, could you market to like our demographic? Do you know what Scottish people are looking for in the marketing? What resonates with them? What doesn't? So as far as like what I'm going to do, I definitely am interested in that globalization aspect. I think with the increases in technology, with the bigger reach that marketing has through social media and everything, a lot of times I have to think from the perspective of others who grew up differently than me, and I try to approach that with a very more of like a humble aspect or a very curious aspect. So I try to surround myself with differences. So at the moment, actually, I'm speaking to a developer about potentially co-founding a studio.
Hmm.
So right now we're looking at the mobile games market, but what's interesting about that is that the my potential co-founder, he's actually from Scotland. So him and I, we kind of have differences in personality and differences in specialties, but at the end of the day, we really feed off of each other in that way. And I think what marketing has done um, for me in my career and where I am today is it's really opened up opportunities with developers. I'm not the type of person that goes to marketing conventions to talk about marketing. I like hanging out with developers because I learn a lot from them. I just started learning what like pull requests are and stuff. So just trying to get a better feel of GitHub, but at the same time, I'm letting them know, hey, have you thought about your branding? Have you thought of what your unique selling proposition is? Have you thought of how you want to convert that into a campaign? And they're like, no, I just want to make this game. So like for me,
Yep.
it's really awesome to feed off with that energy, and just being able to be a little bit different somewhere has
Mhm.
really opened up opportunities to help me explore the possibility of co-founding a studio.
Nice, awesome, very exciting. By the way, I wish you much luck. Please let us know how we can assist that process. I want to echo one thing here, which is niching. Mike is talking about where I sound like a broken record, but it's because I want you to get the message, people. No matter who you are, it really does help to have some area of expertise. We had Oswaldo. I'm forgetting his last name, the creator of Secret Item Games, which is a small publisher out of, I want to say, Germany. Might not be Germany. Somebody can correct me on that. But he talked about how his studio, his publishing house for that matter, specialized in just converting, just localizing one game from one platform to another. And that's like all they do. And they make enough money to survive and work on their own unique projects from doing that. So they've niched down. Same thing it sounds like from Mike. You are specializing in this area of marketing. Now, we are talking here about learning and upskilling yourself. You have talked about some level of objective, potentially starting your own studio, potentially getting into more, sounds like almost like partnerships and biz dev, a little bit less marketing. So give me your 101. What are your hot tips? What are the things that nobody else knows, your secrets to learning and upskilling and getting yourself what you need to take those next steps?
Oh man, super top secret. Well, I think for starters, a lot of times I learn through some sort of self reflection or some sort of like just assessing what happened, like taking the time to have that retrospective and saying, okay, these things happened, and then breaking it down from there. So I think one thing that's helped me with the studies in psychology is that I understand the many ways people can think and learn through kind of studying that. So I know, for example, I'm a mechanical learner, so I can see something or I can hear someone tell me something, but unless I'm actually doing the actions, it's really hard for me to understand what exactly I'm learning, let alone like retaining that information. Um, so just understanding yourself and knowing like, hey, what kind of learner am I? When I am doing retrospectives, am I looking top level and then going down into the details, or do I kind of have a lot of details and then converge into like one moment or one lesson that I've had? And
Yeah.
just like for me, just knowing that, okay, well, I'm a very top level person. So I see like these are all the things that happened. And then, okay, well, how do I break that down? These are things that were within my control. These are things that were
Mm.
not within my control. These are things that are kind of sort of, and then just kind of going down into deeper and deeper into the heart of the onion and just knowing like, hey, like these are the
Becoming more and
details
more an
for
ogre.
this. Exactly. And then you just look like me at one point. So overall, that's kind of like the way that I specifically learn is really understand like maybe what kind of archetypes or what kind of personas, whatever verbiage you want to use, exist, and then saying like maybe I relate to this, and what are these commonalities that people who relate to this have, and then just try to learn from there, and have that um, try to learn with those perspectives. And the most important aspect of any learning is to take breaks. So if you're learning on a computer, stand up, walk around for a little bit, come back. Don't study for 4 hours straight. I tried it at university, and I don't know, could have got better grades from a bachelor's. So
Yeah.
masters, I figured it out. I took more breaks, and I sharpened the sword, and caught
Mhm.
again. But don't do the 8-hour crunches of trying to absorb information like a sponge.
Meanwhile, on the other end of that spectrum is me, who never studied and would only study for about a frantic 24-hour period before every test, and then I would do mostly okay. All right, I love I
We
love a
both
couple of the
figured it
things
out.
we figured it out for ourselves, and I think honestly
Yeah.
that's one of the takeaways from what you just mentioned. I feel like there's three main takeaways, and correct me or add to this if you have other ideas. The first one is to retrospective, which I think is a really good one, and I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that later. So as you learn, don't just learn. Spend a moment to come back and reflect on what you're learning and what has gone well and what hasn't gone well as you apply those learnings. Number two is to know your method of learning. So there are, of course, we have the classic three, the auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners. So the people who learn best by listening, learn best by watching, and learn best by doing. I'm definitely a doer myself. And then there's a chart that you made me think of that I went and grabbed so I could read it to y'all. I'm not sure if these are the original. Apparently, it's Edgar Dale's cone of experience. I'm not actually sure. Somebody else is calling it the cone of learning. I'm not sure what the original name for it is. The chart that I'm looking at least is from the NTL Institute of Applied Behavioral Science Learning Pyramid. Whew, wow.
Whoa.
And it claims, yeah, it
Did
claims that
that
you
by
tend
Paris
to,
Pass.
yeah, right. You tend to absorb or remember about 5% of what you listen to, about 10% of what you read, about 20% of what you audio visual, so both listen and read, about 30% of what is demonstrated to you, about 50% of what you actually talk about doing discussion, about 75% of what you practice doing, that's that kinesthetic learner, and about 90% of what you teach, which is interesting. That's actually why I started this school, so that I could keep learning myself. Um, so that may be a place for all of you to start and to consider. I know, for instance, that I have never been able to read. I hated textbooks so much, and I could still pick up the information that I needed to pass the tests, etc. But man, I hated being assigned like 3 chapters because I would just spend 4 hours reading and then not actually absorb any of it. Love it. All right, so tell me about that retrospective. I think that's maybe the most interesting pullout, and then we're going to move on to Jess in just a moment here. So for the retrospective, I think that's something for everybody to take away from this. How often are you doing retrospectives? And then what is worth doing a retrospective on?
Yeah. So at a minimum, I'd recommend doing a retrospective um, at the end of like what would be considered a milestone for a project. So if there's like a significant event where you can really clarify that something could have gone one way or another. So, for example, I don't. I like to retrospective every night.
Hmm.
So I like to basically go like, well, this day went this way. Um, this could have gone better. This could have not. And a lot of times, it's not necessarily I will learn something concrete that day. It's just getting into the habit of getting into retrospectives. So I don't think you're going to have like this key mind opening experience every night if you do it. But at the very least, go back and be like, I could have walked the dog for 25 minutes instead of 20. But I did it because I did it less because it was colder out, and it's probably better for the dog to come in, or like just getting into the habit of understanding what you kind of gravitate to when you do retrospectives is a really good way to start. But at a minimum, I think if you like sort of key events within IGA, so if you reached a milestone when making a game, if you had an interview, if you got feedback from applications, good or bad, I think once you reach a certain amount of applications or once you have that interview, you should be able to retrospective then and be like, man, I wish I didn't stall for so long for that one question, but maybe it was these words that the interviewer said that kind of threw me off a little bit, and I didn't recognize it in my preparation, so I just tie it back in. So I think there are definitely key moments that you should retrospective, but I'd encourage people to um, do it as often as they'd like, um, and at a minimum, just sort of like reviewing in the day. So I think journaling is a great way to do that. It might not be like a structured way to retrospective, but you're at least logging and thinking about the day and what you think is worth writing in the journal. What are those key things that come out? And in fact, tying it back to gaming, I actually do journal entries in Pikmin Bloom. So if anybody's playing that game on mobile, definitely a huge fan of typing in something. Oh, my day went well. My day was average. My day was bad. Just typing in a log because um, I'm just getting into the habit, and now it's gamified. So I'm a huge fan of things like that.
I didn't even know they did that. That's a wonderful little feature.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think at the very least do a retrospective at each critical milestone, like Mike is talking about. So next time you have an interview, after the interview, spend 20 minutes to say, all right, so what went well there? What could have gone better? Do the same thing every time you finish a game or any major game milestone. So maybe when you finish an alpha, or maybe when you even just like every sprint, maybe after every 2 week period, something like that. And then I think it might be worth trying. I like the idea of journaling basically just being a personal retrospective each night. I used to do that. I don't do that these days, but that may be something that is worth people trying. Start journaling once a night, every night. And pretty quickly, you'll find out. Number one, I think if nothing else, you're recording your life, which is wonderful to go back to a couple years later. And then number two, you're helping the lessons sink in deeper. All right, Mike, it has been wonderful to have you on stage. I'm going to call Jess up to the stage now. We may call you back up for the community questions section, but Mike, thank you so much, man.
Thank you so much, Will. Pleasure being here.
Absolutely. All right, Jess, are you there?
I am here.
Are you excited?
Nervous.
Are you ready?
Yes. I mean, that
Okay,
was
great.
really, you could have had Mike go for the entire podcast. It's going to be a tough act to follow.
That's good. I like it. One of my main objectives is to make you look bad by comparison.
Makes
Just kidding.
sense.
All right. Well, Jess Rowley here. Jessica Rowley is our chief wizard of community at the Indie Game Academy. She is a really wonderful person, really easy to talk with, and has a lot of experience. And interestingly, is somebody who has career transitioned, at least in some way, to work here at the Indie Game Academy. So, Jess, why don't we start with the intro to you? Give me that 60-second spiel. What is your origin story?
Well, I feel like I kind of, in a funny way, tripped into the video game industry. I don't think I ever really thought I was going to be involved in video games much more than casually playing as much as I have. I mean, I've grown up, as we all have, like starting with Pokemon Blue and going just kind of from there. But then I happened to find a fun job listing on AngelList, and it was the most
Yes.
creative job listing I've ever seen. And I think really the rest is history. I mean, it was just, I had a good feeling from it from the very first interview, and it's been an absolutely life changing experience just being part of this community. So, yeah.
I think if I remember right, so we call Jess our chief wizard of community. And I think in this community, that's not that far out of the realm of normalcy. But
Yeah.
that was literally the job title on the
Yep.
job description on
Yeah.
Angel List. And so, there's like program manager, like backend engineer, game designer too, chief wizard of community.
Like, how could you not if you see that? I mean, I don't
I
think I've ever seen anything like that since. I'd never seen anything like it before, so there's no reason to not
yeah.
just throw your hat in the ring.
Jess is also being somewhat humble. So I think, this is your first job per se in the game industry.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you've been in games for a long time. So fun fact of the day that we like to share around, Jess knows exactly what I'm going to talk about, is Jess is actually a national champion, like to the point where she's been interviewed about this in Big Buck Hunter, the arcade game. She's a veterinarian who
Yeah.
likes shooting virtual deer.
Yeah, it's very much a Jekyll and Hyde situation, as I like to
Uh-huh.
call it. But I mean, to be fair, I've never won the championship, so don't go try to look for that. But I have been at the World Championships at least four, or I think 4 or 5 times I've gone.
Mhm.
It's amazing community. I mean, it's pretty small, so you know everybody, and it's a lot of the same people going on every year. And then everybody
Mhm.
who comes in who's new, we're always really welcoming, and everyone has a really great time for a weekend. So I sadly missed it this year, but hopefully next year I'll get to go.
We'll schedule you. What is it? We'll sponsor you. That's the word. We'll get you over there.
I
Get
don't
you
know if
over there in an
sponsoring works when
IGA
you have to
robe.
qualify.
Oh. We'll talk about that later. All right,
Yeah.
so the episode today is supposed to be about learning and growing. So I think you have potentially a unique perspective here, which is this is your first job in the game industry,
Mhm.
and honestly, the first time you really considered working in the game industry. So you
Yeah,
had to learn a lot to be what you are now. So tell us
definitely.
your 101 tips, Jess. Like, how do you learn, and what are some of the things you can recommend to other people to help them upskill in
Um,
games?
yeah. So that's kind of a hard question. I mean, my learning is also learning by doing. I have a pretty difficult time with auditory instructions. Um, so I have to write everything down. I usually have to repeat things to people multiple times when they're giving me instructions, just so I can make sure that I understand what they're saying to me and that I'm not making any, oversights or oversteps, which I think can sometimes come across as I don't know if I don't know. I don't want to say annoying because I don't think it's annoying personally for me. I just want to make sure I'm comprehending everything. Um, but that just making sure that you get all the details. But learning by doing. I mean, I knew the bare minimum about Discord when I first started this, and now people come to me as a reference for how to help optimize their own discords, which I think is really cool, and says a lot about how much I've learned over the past year and a half. And another thing that I really did, I think this is very specific to this community, but I tried to immerse myself as much as possible. I know there was a number of people that I had talked to when I first joined the community to just be like, hey, what's this all about? Who are you? What's important to you? What do you find? What makes you keep coming back to this community? And just embodying those and making sure that I continue their expectations and then start to exceed their expectations and making sure that this is a, a place for everybody that they want to be.
That's awesome.
I think it's
I
working.
I would say so. The fact that we've had explosive growth over the past year may be an indicator.
Yeah.
I think
An
there's a couple.
indicator.
Hey! All right, I'm gonna switch to our next guest now. Just
Okay,
kidding.
that's fine.
All right, so a couple of things to pull out of that one are number one, I think, write everything down. That one I think is specific to the type of learner. If you're the type of learner where
Mhm.
that helps, I think that's good. But just like Mike mentioned with journaling, there's a reason that journaling and taking notes are even a part of the typical like education process, I guess. And it's because it's simply a second moment for your brain to be focusing on the information. And so it sinks in deeper. Even if you never looked at those notes again, you are learning more simply by writing them down, if nothing else. And then, of course, you're more organized. And like Jess, that's going to be easier for you to follow and um,
Mhm.
knock off your tasks, etc. Second one is repetition, which is huge. As an educator, actually, that's something I think about a lot. I repeat myself a lot, sometimes to the point where I've been made fun of for it. But it is incredibly helpful. If you don't, this is why I do this little moment that I'm doing with you right now, Jess, where I'm taking some
Mhm.
of what you said and trying to output what I believe to be the core lessons that you are teaching us. Because those who are listening are going to remember it better, and then I myself am going to remember it better. And then finally, immerse yourself. I actually think is a great tip. Like dive deep in if you want to learn something new. If you want to work in games, for instance, go to game conventions, find a gamer community. Go and build games. Of course, do everything you can. Listen to podcasts. Go watch YouTube videos of retrospectives on other people's games and vlogs on their production process. Like, there's so many different ways that you can immerse yourself in a community, even if it's not games. There's other ways that you can immerse yourself in other communities for learning different skills. And as you do
Definitely.
that, it all just percolates. So,
Yeah. And I also, to go a little bit against what you said earlier, I also
hmm.
love reading. Um,
Ah,
so I say that anything that you can get your hands on for whatever you're trying to learn, especially if it's interesting to you, will allow you to, I think, absorb things so much quicker.
mm,
There's actually a book I'm asking for Christmas specifically about communities and community management that I'm hoping that I'm getting just so I can continue to improve. And I don't think that there's ever a peak where you feel like you've known everything that you can possibly learn. Like it's just
hmm.
I feel like it's so hard. It's always practice, it's never perfect.
Yeah,
Um and if you stop learning, I think that that's when you can stagnate, and
that
then
is
you either have
death.
to do some self-assessment, and then you're like, is this the right spot for me, or do I need to pivot and do something different, do something else that invigorates you? And that's also okay to do. Like, it's
Love
okay
that.
to understand that there's just patterns and ebbs and flows in your life, and you can move on or find a different way to use all the information that you've already learned and move somewhere else. I've done that multiple times over all the different jobs that I've had. So,
I love that. That's a wonderful message. There's actually from a relationship advice book, there's a concept of life, or in this case, relationships, but I think this definitely applies to education and our personal interests. Life has seasons. Seasons change over time. They are distinctly different. Sometimes they repeat themselves. I guess regularly they repeat themselves. So, there may be a time where you're feeling totally lost, and then you get it together and you're like, all right, I have it together again. And then you'll feel lost again. That's just normal. It's okay. And also, yeah, don't ever stop learning. Sometimes that stresses me out, but like, I don't know, if you aren't learning, you're dying. That's my opinion. Amazing.
you can always do a crossword.
Yeah. Just chill. Just chill. All right. I'm going to call Rick up to the stage. Jess, thank you for chatting for a bit. I'm going to
All right.
call all three of you back up towards the end to do the
Okay.
community questions. But for now, let's get
Okay.
Rick up here. Thank you, Jess.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, Jess. I feel like one of the like core things that we're talking about here in today's episode is learn your own way. Don't get stressed out when other people tell you the way that you're supposed to learn or whatever. It is okay for you to learn the way that works for you, and even good if you're maximizing yourself. I feel like there's pressure to learn the way that people tell you to. But I read a bajillion fiction books a year, or I listen to them, and I don't really read many nonfiction books. I don't really read many instructional manuals or anything like that. I just listen to dope books, and I get my own lessons, my own inspiration, my own motivation from them. Rick, where are you? Get on stage, my guy. All right. If Rick doesn't come on stage in just a moment, I'm gonna pull Gwen on stage because Gwen also always has great things to say. Okay. I'm gonna invite Gwen. Whoever gets on stage first is going. All right, Gwen. It's your time to
Hey.
shine. Hello.
Well, so one of my other gigs is I'm actually a curriculum designer. And so I
Okay.
work with teachers to develop curriculum books. We
Hmm.
did physics, we did economics, we did art, we've done a bunch of books.
Wow.
And the method we use for that we found most effective for learning for results is guided inquiry.
Hmm.
So our method is instead of, say, a lot of books will start with like a section of information that you read and then questions to questions to reinforce that knowledge or to make sure you understood what you read. Our curriculum starts with questions. It starts with questions, and they start simple, and they get more complex. And the questions lead you to the answer. So instead of, say, a book that defines a term for you, you will have like a diagram, like for instance in our art book, say complementary colors, instead of saying like complementary colors are colors on the opposite side of the wheel of the color wheel, we'll have like a diagram that shows like some complementary colors, some non-complementary colors, and we'll ask you some questions about that diagram. What do these colors have in common? What are different? And then at the end, when we get to the end, we'll ask you like, now define complementary colors. And if the questions are well crafted, you can get the vast majority of students by the end of the exercise to be able to define the term.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the reason we do this is rooted in neuroscience. The reason we do it this way is because we've found in just looking at how the brain functions that the thing that cements knowledge in your mind is that aha moment of the moment when it clicks and you understand the concept. You've figured out the concept yourself, and that's what makes it stick. That's what we are trying to reproduce in our curriculum. And the reason that's interesting in this context, of course, is you might be thinking correctly, that sounds like a game. Which it's very similar. So it's very similar to a puzzle game where you're pushing around crates or whatever to figure out how to get to the door, or whatever you're doing. And you have that moment when it clicks and you see, oh, I have to do this and this and this and this. So we're reproducing that exact same thing your brain is doing that's very satisfying to your brain, that causes your brain to build those pathways. The same way it's satisfying to do like a puzzle in a game, it's also satisfying to learn new concepts if you use this method.
Yeah, that's awesome. This is a really interesting topic. I think there's a lot to potentially say here. I feel like, first of all, something to call out. I feel like I've been running into instructional designers and curriculum designers like way more often lately. I don't know if they're kind of in the meta. People are talking about it right now, or what. But definitely a game designer and an instructional or educational designer are much more similar than you might think. We're both basically trying to figure out how to convey information in a way that the user actually pays attention to and remembers.
And the other benefit of this kind of method that's also a benefit of playing games, for the same reason, is that they don't just teach you the factual knowledge that the curriculum is trying to convey, like what is a complementary color. They also teach you other skills in the process. They teach you analytical skills. They teach you data interpretation skills. They teach you critical reasoning skills, which are these skills that are these, we call them process skills, that are some of the most crucially important skills for you to learn. These are the skills that every employer in every job on earth wants you to have, right? And you learn those skills in the same way, just by the act of sort of puzzling out what the curriculum is trying to teach you and answering these questions. You also learn really valuable skills that you can apply to any topic.
Yeah,
any
I think
field you're in.
From what you described, it seems like part of the difference in this approach, in the guided inquiry approach, is that largely you're trying to actually get the student, in this case, to ask the questions themselves and answer the questions themselves, as opposed to telling them information to regurgitate.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason that I like that, sure, thank you. I really like that because I think ultimately that teaches more base level understanding that then applies to more, just like you're talking about. If I'm taking in information and then I'm able to regurgitate that information, I may be able to use that information, yes, but ultimately the main thing I've studied is how to regurgitate that information. If instead I'm taking in a problem and I'm solving the problem and I have figured out the ways that problem gets solved, then I have a more base level, almost like the atoms of the problem that I can put together and solve other problems with.
Yeah. And this is also connected to, you're talking about teaching someone else the topic being one of the best ways to learn a topic and to build
Yeah.
that knowledge. And that's for the exact same reasons, of course. The process of how do I put this, you know, what questions do I ask the person, or how do I put it so that they will understand the topic is reinforcing the exact same parts of the brain.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. There's once again, I'm like totally openly admit that part of the reason I ever started IGA was for this reason. I was teaching for somebody else and I was like, man, I'm so much better at Unity right now because I've taught a bunch of students how to use it. And in a similar way, running IGA has helped me learn so much about game development. I am fully immersed, Jess. Now, I think one other thing, I guess, last thing to call out about what you're talking about, Gwen, is you also mentioned testing knowledge, which I think is important.
Mhm.
It's part of the reason that we focus so much on project-based learning at IGA because we believe that why study how to build a specific system in a game rather than just build the thing. So tell me, I guess, a little bit about how you recommend people test their knowledge. Do you recommend it be? Yeah, I don't want to lead you. Tell me about testing knowledge.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to test it is, of course, just like a practical applications of it.
Hmm.
Um, right. So, like in our art curriculum, for instance, we don't ever actually define these terms like in words because the definition is not really that important. Like the exact wording of the definition. What's important is um, whether you can apply the concept. So, well, then the end, our actual question that tests the knowledge is we give you some different artworks and we say like circle the ones that use complementary colors. And if you can do that, that's what we consider you've mastered the topic. You can use it in application. You'll be able to use it in your own artwork in the future.
Awesome. Yeah. So being able to demonstrate mastery, or at least like a base level of mastery. Awesome.
Apply, yeah, having
Yeah.
being able to apply the skill is really because that's also ultimately um, learning to like repeat the definition is of no benefit whatsoever if you can't apply it, right? That's what you're actually trying to learn is you're trying to learn whatever skill it is for the
Mm-hmm.
purpose of doing something with that skill. That's the important
Mm-hmm.
thing you're trying to master, not
Right.
just the words.
Not the words exactly, which I
Yeah.
think educators can fall into that trap because it's easy. But ultimately,
Yeah.
like your students aren't learning if they learn the words. I mean, they are,
Mhm.
but they're not learning as effectively as they could be. Rick, for instance, in the comments, which I think is a good comment, says, I always found it helpful to go through periods, maybe states of heavy academia, followed by heavy application of what you learned. So,
Yeah.
learning a bunch, taking in information, and then I'm trying it, seeing what happens.
Well, this actually goes back to the neuroscience of how your brain learns, and so now Rick's absolutely right. Um, to cement those pathways, right? The key thing here is moving from like your short-term memory to your long-term memory, and the way you do that, it was very important, is to like reinforce the knowledge a little while later, a few
Hmm.
days later, right? So that's why you cram for a test like an hour before the test. You won't remember a thing later on, right?
That was always my strategy. I don't know.
Yeah. So exactly what Rick's saying. If you spend a bunch of time learning and then you spend a bunch of time applying that knowledge, you're going back, you're reinforcing those pathways. That's going to cement those pathways in your long-term memory, and you're going to retain the skill in a way you don't if you just like sit and cram.
Yeah. We are literally talking about, by the way, neural pathways. We are literally talking about physical parts of your brain being
Yeah.
built to retain that information. So we're not just saying, like, you're going to remember it better. We're saying your brain is literally changing and becoming more effective at storing and using this information if you are using that information more than once. All right,
Yeah.
it is community question time. I would love to get some other people asking questions besides myself. Got about 15 minutes left of the episode. Major Bacon here up on stage has the first question to pose to the group. Major Bacon, would you like to ask your question?
Sure thing. Thanks again for coming here, and also this community podcast. This is a really cool thing. Listening to all of this really got me thinking that, yeah, while I do agree with and like understand how to learn and what steps to take in order to continue reinforcing the learning stages, it's always coming back to that one point that I think I mentioned, that whenever I do try something, quitting is just so easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that whole working towards making sure that that doesn't happen is what really comes is a challenging part, I feel. So do you guys have any understandings of how one can be accountable to themselves while also making sure that this doesn't really interfere with the whole learning situation?
It's a great question. So we've got Mike, Gwen, Rick, and Jess all on stage. Any of you feel free to unmute and answer this however you'd like.
I'll chime in a bit just because one thing that I really like to reference when I'm thinking about what I'm motivated by is called the motivation equation. So you can look into it, but essentially it defines motivation based off of four qualities. It's expectancy, value, impulsivity, and delay. So what it basically means is motivation is how likely you think you'll receive the payoff. So what you are trying to get. So do you feel like it's actually achievable? And then value is how much do you value that? So, you can achieve a candy bar or $10,000 or whatever. There's different values, but the expectancy can be different for that. And that's also prefaced with impulsivity. So, how many things are going on around you while you're trying to achieve the thing that you want? And then delay. So, how long will it actually take? So, if you think things like more objectively and try to define like what exactly how much motivation you have towards the thing that you're studying or ultimately the end goal of why you're studying, you can maybe see things from that perspective and say like, okay, well, if this is going to take 2 years, maybe because there's a lot of distractions or there's a lot of other like shorter goals, maybe that's why my motivation is more geared towards the shorter goals. So I'd recommend looking at things objectively from a motivation perspective and then also seeing like, well, how can I break this large goal into smaller goals so that you can have that momentum of that motivation go towards the smaller goals and ultimately give yourself some breadcrumbs to where you really want to be. That makes sense.
Awesome. That's a great start. Anybody else have thoughts on this question? How do you hold
Yeah,
yourself accountable?
yeah, I would say that when you decide that you want to actively pursue game development and you want to make it a serious goal, it's about making it a priority in your life. You have your different goals that you have set for yourself. I want to go to the gym. I want to read more. I want to eat healthy. I want to make games. Ultimately, what you actually do shows your priorities. So you need to build yourself a lifestyle where you cut out the things that are not your deliberate priority and have a routine, have set times that you work on it every single day, regardless of what you're working on. It's got to be something that you build your life around. So that
Nice.
for sticking with the motivation, motivation is a fickle mistress. You got to get discipline in there.
Yeah, there's some random EDM song I listen to now and then, I think called Discipline Equals Freedom, maybe. Somebody can check that for me. But the entire chorus is discipline equals freedom. And it's very true. Motivation is fleeting. I think we in many ways, many of us aim for a life where we're always motivated, but ultimately that's just fake. Like that will never happen. You'll have periods, maybe a week, a month, a year, even where you're motivated all the time, but you will never have motivation on 100% of the time. Um, Willem casually plugging his brand. I don't know. I do it all the time. Oh, my band. Yes, that's my band. And then I think something I want to throw in here that's very specific and weird. It's a very Willem answer to your question. How do you hold yourself accountable? I have always believed. I have always essentially looked at motivation as like momentum. You build momentum, you lose momentum. So there are tasks, there are things that we do that make us more motivated, build that momentum, keep us running faster, further. And there are things that lower that momentum, that make us more lethargic. And remember that high momentum is not possible all the time. That's like trying to keep a balloon too inflated all the time. It's just impossible. But one of the things that I do very occasionally, I've only done it maybe 4 or 5 times in my life, when I'm really trying to build momentum, when there's something very important in my life, is I create my own ceremony for that thing, my own kickoff for that thing. So I can remember a specific moment where I was trying. This was during my first startup. I was really sick of it. I wanted to quit. I was like, I can't do this anymore. But I also knew that I wasn't done learning from it, and that it probably wasn't the right time to quit yet. So I went to Ocean Beach in San Francisco. I sat down with a couple of my more like spiritual implements, and I wrote a contract with myself that said I will work on this thing for 6 months. I will not question it, period, for 6 months. And then at the end of that 6 months, I can consider stopping this project. But until then, I cannot stop it. I signed that contract with myself, and then I went and jumped into Ocean Beach on a winter day and like made it a memorable moment. That was my ceremony that I invented for myself. And I've done something similar to that a couple of different times. And what that does is it's first of all just an unusual moment, and therefore you're more likely to remember it. It has high emotional impact. I'm like stressing myself out. I'm running a contract. There's physical evidence. All of that helps to build that momentum and stick what I've agreed to do further into my brain. And then it's harder. There's more stopping me from quitting. So something for you to consider, maybe.
Building
Do you
your
feel?
social circle
Mm.
around other game developers really helps too. Having people who you can talk to about your achievements and what you've done, it it's wonderful to be able to show it to people who understand what went into making it. In addition, you're inspired and challenged by the other people in those social circles. So being in a community like this one really helps for motivation.
Yes, celebrate your wins.
Honestly, it's true though. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't underestimate the power of the social circle. It helps for sure. That's why we're here, y'all. All right, I think we're Major Bacon. Does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-ups there?
Yeah, it does in spades actually. I like the ceremony bit that you mentioned. We kind of like a team really took notes from the celebrating all the small wins, and I wanted to do it. I think in a previous episode I mentioned to celebrate and stuff. Wanted to do it a lot, but again, quitting is just so much more easier for some reason.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Sticking with it was always a problem with me in a lot of
Yeah.
things. So I get it. Like making a habit out of it, being around people takes effort, and making sure that like the priorities are aligned with what you want to do. That's another motivation thing. No,
Yeah,
that
I love
makes
that.
sense. Like it answers the question in a lot of ways, more ways
Good.
than one, honestly.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear that. I think I will call out, by the way, that quitting is a legit option sometimes. It is very much real that occasionally the things we think are so important are not actually serving us. And it is really, really, really hard to tell the difference. For instance, that ceremony that I just talked about, where I committed to another 6 months on that project, about a year after that, I cut the company. I stopped working on it, and I closed the thing down. And that was the right choice. That business was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, but ultimately it couldn't support itself for sure. It may have if I had kept working on it or I had alternate approaches. But at least for me at the time, it was the right choice to quit. And I think I don't know if I have any tips on how you know when the right moment is, but that is a legit option. It's part of why I liked in that specific contract example having a 6 month period because it was like, okay, maybe I'll quit in 6 months, but for right now, I'm just going to focus and I'm not going to question it. That felt very like liberating to me. And then after that 6 months, honestly, I quit. Sometimes that's okay. All right, I want to get at least one more question in here. So John wrote a question for us in the comments that I think is really strong. I think it'll be our last question of the day. So once again, anybody on stage who would like to, feel free to answer this one. The question is, for beginners who are wanting to be a sponge to everything, specifically in the game industry, but possibly outside of it, how do you soak up that knowledge and pace yourself with what you learn? Any thoughts?
You want to go, Rick?
Yeah, sure. So I would say start it with finding some kind of expert guidance. Like, let's say you want to learn something brand new, identify a tutorial or a class that you can take in order to ease your learning curve into something that's completely new. Second, you want to make sure that you don't schedule out 100% of your time. Make sure that you have enough time to more casually look through or go through the content, give yourself plenty of time so you're not stressed, but also give yourself time to play with the information that you're learning. Because if you just do exactly what's in the curriculum, you don't learn how to continue to expand and explore. From there, once you have understood what you are looking at from a base context, then it's a good idea. Like, let's say you're learning the particle system in Unity, and your tutorial that you watched taught you how to build a flamethrower. But then you say, oh, well, look at all these other things that are tangential but weren't actually touched. You now have some context, and then you can go through and explore that step by step. Those tend to be good ways to get started, where you don't just jump in, where you have no idea where you are, no bearing at all.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on pacing yourself, Mike?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what Rick said, because like right now I'm learning a lot about the the production of game development. So I get a lot of resources and assets and stuff, but um, what I think is most important when you have to be a sponge and absorb everything is really ask yourself, what are things that I really should know right now? Because whenever I hear there's a huge influx of information, I ask myself, like, what are things that I have to commit to memory and know at all times, and what are things I can reference because I have the time to pull it out of my toolkit. So at some point, ideally, it would be good to internalize it, especially if you do that from an action, from a doing perspective. But if you're taking from the fire hose, what I'm doing with production is I have a Word document, a Google Doc of everything that I pulled from that text, removed like all the ands and the does and whatever, and just made bullet points and references, visual references. So I have like a producer's playbook based off of everything. And now I'm actually participating in my first game jam. It's run by ABK, and it's for veterans in the States. So I have terrible sleep hours at the moment, but that's all right. And I'm going to apply the document that I have as a producer for the game jam. So I think piggybacking with Rick, like the things that you are learning at a dramatic rate, you do have to apply them. But I would caveat and say, get whatever your source of information is from, try to trim it a little bit. Try to say like, well, these are things that, if you're learning particle effects in Unity, these are things that I obviously need to know. But do I need to have, do I need to create everything in its entirety exactly like this example or not? And really try to play with what you feel means that you've successfully learned everything and what your definition of complete for that is. Which in the case of learning through programming, outside of like a curriculum, you do have a little bit more flexibility in saying, well, this is done, versus when you have to have that guidance from like a teacher. So try to ask yourself, is this flow rate, like, is the amount of information I'm taking in, do I really need all this right now? And then start prioritizing what you need to commit to memory and what you can reference later, and then definitely apply that as you will.
Awesome. Gwen or Jess, do you have anything to say about not getting overwhelmed?
Yeah, well, in our approach to curriculum, we actually don't use terms really like covering material, right? Like, so we need to cover all this material today, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We find that, yeah, because the thing is, like, if you cram just a bunch of material into one day, it's just your retention drops very, very fast. So we keep the focus always on the process, not on like box checking and getting through stuff, right? The important thing is to, progress through the material and make sure you're understanding it at every stage. And that goes at whatever pace it goes. And you might not get through everything. Maybe you get through like a quarter as much stuff in terms of like what you put in front of your eyeballs. But doing a quarter as much work and retaining it all is way better than doing 100% of the work and not retaining any of it.
Love that. Yeah, I think something I was going to throw in here that is almost exactly the same thing. A tip I got a long time ago, or is simply just anytime you learn something, maybe you're listening to a podcast, maybe you're going to a class, maybe you are working on a project. If you can walk away with one core learning, that is progress. And then I think that lowers the pressure to like try to remember it all. And of course, if you can remember it all without burning yourself out, then great. But as long as you can walk away with just like one key thing, okay, awesome, this is what I'm going to do differently, then you have made progress, you have learned something, and that's much more attainable on a regular basis than trying to cram it all in. All right, we're going to do one last rapid fire question. So I want like 60-second answers or less. We're a little bit over, but I'm just enjoying this. Hopefully, all of you are too. So Alec asks, how do I know if an idea is maybe not bad, but not good enough? So I talked about quitting a little bit earlier. How do you know when an idea is not good enough? What are your measures of, okay, I should stop focusing on this learning project? Who's got thoughts?
For me, it's a lot about just the passion I have for something. That's really the benchmark I use. Is just if I'm not excited about it, nobody else is gonna be.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I honestly think that that's like a solid, simple answer. In games, especially, you can feel the passion of the developers in the final product. And so, if you're not interested in working on this game, then it's not going to be a good game, or at least the work you contribute is not going to be strong. And the same is true for learning. If you're not excited to learn something, then you're just not going to learn it as well. So, I think honestly, just personal enthusiasm is a great benchmark, if nothing else. Anybody else have alternate thoughts?
So if I'm using a project specifically for learning something new, once I feel like I've gotten a grasp on it, then I feel like it's okay. I've got an idea for how this system works. If I if I'm trying to test out a new concept, it's really just about play testing it with people and seeing if people get excited at a very, very basic MVP or not. If nobody's getting excited about it, then it's not worth pursuing longer term.
100% with that one. I think I've mentioned this before. This is another one of those where there's no hard rule that answers it 100% of the time, but the enthusiasm of the game players, of the playtesters, is huge and is another sort of staple. If people are kind of like, yeah, I had fun, then that means they're fine with it, but it's probably not going to sell. If they leave the playtest going, wow, that was awesome, I want to be on your email list, like tell me how to get updated about this. If they show some level of enthusiasm, especially if they show wanting to be connected in some way, then that is a major win. I mentioned this example before, but when my own personal indie studio, the Delve Bros, was choosing which game they would work on, there's one game that I kind of wish we had built. I'm happy with Tailmore, tabletop adventure game, but I kind of wish we had built Wizard Crossing, which was Animal Crossing meets Harry Potter. And part of the reason I kind of wish we had done that is because of the playtester responses. We had people asking to work for us, like pretty much from the get-go. Just from, by the way, that was when we just had an ad. We didn't even have a prototype yet. We had people asking when it was going to come out. We had people asking to be notified. And that was not something we got for the most part with Tailmore. So there are fairly, maybe not obvious, but fairly like evident maybe signs that a concept is promising, whatever the objective for that concept is. Any last thoughts from anybody on stage? How do you know when something's not worth pursuing anymore?
The only thing I just would add is make sure you know what good means. Like you need to define what you think success is for that. That's especially true in marketing, depending on where you are in the marketing funnel and who you're targeting, who your audience is. Do they know about you? Have they heard of your game? Are they interested in learning more? Knowing what good means, and making sure, if you want to apply SMART goals or something and, make it a realistic, attainable goal. Um, and a lot of times, just piggybacking on everyone else, a really easy to understand metric is feedback. So if you have a lot of people saying that they're interested or saying, I want to test your game, I want to tell my friends about the game, they wish list it, just make sure you define what success is and then decide what good or not is from there. Because you want to set realistic expectations and you want to be able to know when you've reached good, not necessarily in the middle too.
Super solid piece of advice. I think the to tack onto that and be done with it. I think remember that different projects can have very different goals, and different people can have very different goals. So while one project might literally be for finances, monetary, this is meant to sell, that's going to give you a very specific lens to think about when you are deciding on the promise of this project versus if a project is just for career building or portfolio building or learning a specific new thing, whatever. So having your why, your actual objective for this project, and when I say project, by the way, I'm not talking about the prototype. I'm talking about the larger picture where many different games could fulfill that project or that objective, where you are considering many different options. That I think helps a lot if you know why you're even building this game in the first place, working on this project in the first place. Okay, it is 1:07. We've gone like way over, but I've just been having a lot of fun. I love these community episodes. I feel like every time we do one of these, I'm like, man, we got to do these more often. But it has been wonderful to talk with all of you. As usual, I still want to give everybody a piece of homework before we say goodbye. So I'm going to try to summarize or stick everything we've learned today into one homework assignment. So here is what I think we should do. Your homework for the next week, something you can do in the next week, is to pick a subject that you know you need to learn more about. So if you're a game designer, maybe you have to pick some visual scripting up. If you are aspiring 3D artist, maybe you got to go learn Blender. A new tool or a new subject or a new area of study. I want you to pick something like that. And then I want you to do enough research on it that you can write me a nice, neat LinkedIn post explaining what you have learned about that subject. All right. So in the next week, I want you to pick a new subject. I want you to learn about it. And then I want you to write a LinkedIn post about that thing, explaining it to your audience. And then I want you to tag us with hashtag IGLH homework, Indie Game Lunch Hour homework, hashtag IGLH homework. And you can tag us as well, just at Indie Game Academy. And we'll comment on it and tell you you're awesome and repost it and all kinds of good stuff like that. All right, that is definitely the end of the episode. I think my final word to all of you is simply remember that everybody learns a different way. And don't get caught up in thinking you have to learn like anybody else. The whole like startup founder crowd loves to talk about how many books they read every year. Who cares? Do it your way. If reading books is not for you, do more practice projects or whatever the heck else works for you. You probably already know what works for you. You could be just halfway through your high school career and you probably already know what education and what learning approach works for you. So don't listen to the others. Experiment with the others if you hear some different perspective, but ultimately follow the one that works for you. All right, that's going to be it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's been wonderful talking. Thank you for those who answered some questions for us and got up on stage. Gwen, Rick, Jess, Mike, and Major Bacon, thank you for being here with me. And thank you, listener, for listening. If you enjoyed, we ask that you send it along to just one other person who you think would enjoy listening to. And of course, join us again next week, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time in our Discord. There's links to join down below. Goodbye, everybody. Adios.